Hey yo, welcome to our channel today. I became a stepfather to a 5-year-old child at the age of 32. My wife is Margaret, and my son is David. They are my treasures. It's the second time, so I don't really want a wedding, said Margaret. But I insisted Margaret hold a wedding ceremony. I will never forget the nervous faces of Margaret dressed in a more beautiful wedding dress than I imagined, and David wearing a bow tie. I met Margaret 3 years ago. I fell in love at first sight with Margaret, who was dispatched to my company. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I worked in sales, and Margaret was an office worker, so there was hardly anything I could teach her, honestly. However, I yearned to leave an impression on her somehow. The only thing you can teach her is the location of the smoking area. My section chief chimed in. I'm sorry. I don't smoke, so I'll just take your sentiments. Margaret apologized to me, and she was so cute. I have a son. When she said that at the welcome party, it brought me down, but she was divorced from her husband and was a single mother. I understood the meaning of the distance I felt when talking to her. Even though she kept her distance, I approached her without hesitation. So when she finally agreed to go on a date after my persistent approaching, I was overjoyed. After that, we went on several dates and started meeting David as well. At the first time, David was very scared of me because he didn't know me. There were days when David's mood was bad, and he would go home right away. I thought maybe he didn't like the smell of cigarettes, so I quit smoking. With my persistence, David gradually warmed up to me and began to open his mind. Will Thomas come watch the next school performance? I had to hold back tears when David said that. And so, I married Margaret when David was 5 years old and became David's father. David calls me Dad. We live together in the same house and eat meals together. Those were happy days. Today is Dad's birthday, so we're having beef stew for dinner. Margaret proudly said while preparing the stew plates. Having beef stew for my birthday was a tradition. Margaret's beef stew was just incredibly delicious. I asked her for the recipe, but she said it's a secret. I helped Mom with cooking today too, David said proudly. Lately, David has been interested in cooking and often helps Margaret. You did. I am so proud. I couldn't contain my emotions that my son made a meal for me. But then I had a sudden question. Wait, did you teach David how to cook beef stew? Margaret skillfully prepared the salad and pretended not to hear me. Well, you see, the food tastes better when someone else prepares it for you, David whispered to me. When I looked at Margaret, she nodded with satisfaction. So that's how it is. I couldn't fully digest it, but as we ate the beloved beef stew together, I forgot about it. The year when David became 10 years old, the separation came suddenly. Margaret got in a traffic accident and lost her life. Thomas, please stay calm and listen. Margaret was in an accident. When I received a call from my mother-in-law, I didn't understand what she was saying for a moment. Margaret in the casket looked as if she were sleeping. I felt like she could wake up any moment and smile at me. But the reality hit me with her surprisingly cold cheek. I don't remember how much I cried. Before I knew it, the funeral was over. We will take David and live together. I was surprised when my mother-in-law told me that. Although I've raised David as if he were my own son, we're not biologically parent and child. Now that Margaret has passed away, she says I have no obligation to take care of David. If you want, come and visit David occasionally, my father-in-law, who aged significantly in these few days, kindly smiled and patted my shoulder. I wonder what David thinks. Would it be best for him to live with his biological grandparents after all? Should I let David choose? Or should I inform him as a decision? David, can we talk for a moment? Dad. David was sitting on the bed with his legs crossed. He looked up at me without turning on the lights. I remembered when he and Margaret laughed about how one day he would call me Dad instead of Daddy and her mom. I didn't know how to discuss the future with David, so we sat in silence for a while. Will you be gone too, Dad? David broke the silence. I was surprised by David's unexpected question. I won't be gone, I instinctively replied. David smiled slightly. Do you want to continue living with me like this? Or David interrupted my words. I want to keep living with you, Dad. I felt the responsibility to answer as a father from David's strong response. No matter what anyone says, David is my son. I talked to Margaret's parents and told them I wanted to continue raising David. They didn't immediately agree. They were concerned that if I remarried, David might get hurt, or perhaps David would become a hindrance to my remarriage. It's challenging enough to raise a child who is biologically mine, let alone one who isn't. I could feel their worry for their grandchild and their desire to live with him, and I felt sorry. After many discussions, they finally agreed that David would occasionally stay at their place. If you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask. You're our son, after all. I was grateful for my mother-in-law's kindness. When I took in David, father and son's life began. It goes without saying, but David was greatly shocked by the loss of his mother. He managed to go to school, but he started spending more time at home, isolating himself. I thought that it would be better for David's emotional well-being if he went outside, but since he disliked it himself, there was nothing I could do about it. I thought about cooking to cheer him up at home. Since I had lived on my own for a long time, I could manage household chores, but I loved Margaret's cooking. So I left it all to her after we got married. From now on, I have to cook myself. I'll cook something to make David feel better. Despite my determination, cooking turned out to be more difficult than I expected. If it were just me, anything would have been fine, but I needed to consider a balanced diet for David's growth. There were days when I didn't want to think about anything and ordered pizza delivery, and I felt guilty. There were also times when I tried to challenge myself to cook Margaret's beef stew. It's not the same as Mom's beef stew. Children are honest, and David pointed it out. I knew better than anyone that it didn't taste like Margaret's. However, no matter what I did, I couldn't replicate Margaret's taste, so somehow I ended up avoiding cooking it. Still, seeing David's happy face when he enjoyed pizza delivery or when he said my cooking was delicious truly saved my heart. David quickly became a middle school student. The school uniform I got for him was too big, but I felt his growth in his dignified appearance, and my eyes welled up with tears. However, just when the uniform was starting to fit perfectly, something I feared happened: the rebellious phase. At the beginning of his school days, he used to tell me about the events of the day and his friends' stories, but recently he stopped doing that altogether. There are no rude remarks, and he answers when I talk to him, but it's clearly different from before. We used to cook together, but now it's completely stopped. I'm not sure how far I can intervene, so I've decided to quietly watch over him, but it's still lonely. Recently, he started going out somewhere on his days off. He comes back in time for dinner, so it's not a problem, but I'm curious about where he's going. I've noticed that you've been going out a lot on your days off. Where are you going? While we are having dinner, I mustered the courage to ask David. I'm studying at the library with a friend. He's good at teaching me. I didn't miss David's evasive eyes, suspicious. I remember using this kind of response myself. I told my parents like this, and then I went on a date with my girlfriend at the time. I see. So David has someone like that too. How about bringing your good friend to our house next time? David glanced around and said, yeah, sometime in the future. With that, he stood up and left. During Friday's dinner, David unexpectedly started talking. So you're going golfing tomorrow, right? Yeah, I'll be leaving in the morning, so should I prepare something for lunch? No, I'll be out too, so don't worry about it. I see. I'll be back for dinner though. Should I buy some sushi? Nah, we can just use what we have at home. After that, David finished dinner as usual, and he went back to his room without saying much. I started drinking alone. David has a date tomorrow, huh? There are so many things I want to ask, but I remember how annoying it was when I was a middle schooler, and my parents interfered with my affairs. However, now that I've become a parent myself, I'm eager to talk to my son. I never thought there would come a day when I'd feel this way. I wonder if there will be a time when David and I can have a drink together. David isn't good at waking up early. He usually sleeps in. However, today was different. When I woke up in the morning, David was already awake. Wow, David, you're up early. Good morning. Good morning. I made breakfast. Do you want to eat? You made it, David. I'll definitely eat it. David made ham and eggs with miso soup with seaweed and tofu. It's our regular breakfast at home. As I tried to help set the table, David told me to sit and wait. Let's eat. We both sat at the dining table and started eating. The slightly runny texture is just how I like it. It's delicious, I couldn't help but exclaim. You're exaggerating, David said with a slightly embarrassed look. I never knew breakfast made by my son could be this delicious. I remember when Margaret cooked for me for the first time. Just like now, I was moved by the deliciousness, and Margaret had the same reaction as David does now. Today's golf is going to yield a good score, I thought as I left in high spirits. I'm home. When I returned home, I could smell something good. Is this beef stew? Hey, Dad, you're home. David greeted me while stirring the pot. He asked me to sit down, and he quickly arranged dinner on the table for me. Following breakfast, David also made dinner for me, and my heart was filled with joy. Then, as soon as I took a bite of the beef stew, I was surprised. It tasted exactly like the one Margaret made. Not only the taste, but also the size of the vegetables and the tenderness of the potatoes were the same. But why? He made beef stew all of a sudden. Happy birthday. You forgot again, didn't you? David said with a slightly bewildered expression. I had completely forgotten, but today was my birthday. In recent years, I've been forgetting my own birthday, and it has become customary for David to remind me. It was already heartwarming enough for my teenage son to remember my birthday and say happy birthday. But this year, he even cooked for me, and it's my favorite beef stew. I've been worried about Dad lately because you haven't been feeling well. David began speaking while keeping his eyes on the cooking. He thought that if I eat my favorite beef stew, it would make me feel better. So he wanted to recreate his mother's beef stew. If he was going to make it anyway, he relied on vague memories from his childhood, and Margaret taught him how to make it. However, it didn't turn out well, so he went to consult my mother-in-law. Although she didn't know how to make Margaret's beef stew, they cut the vegetables in the same way. So, on his day off, he went to his grandparents' house to learn how to cut vegetables and experimented to get closer to Margaret's taste. Hearing that story, I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief because it wasn't a date. I was embarrassed by my easy assumption that it was a date right away. However, I was very happy that he went through all that effort for me. David continued speaking with a serious expression. Do you remember the time you made beef stew right after Mom passed away? Ah, yeah, but I couldn't recreate your mom's taste at all. Yeah, but when I actually tried to make it, it was incredibly difficult to recreate. I'm sorry I said it was different from Mom's beef stew back then. David, who had been avoiding eye contact with me in embarrassment, finally looked at me and apologized sincerely. I wondered if he had remembered that all this time. Perhaps it was because he was concerned about his rebellious phase that he seemed to think I wasn't feeling well. David had expressed his feelings directly to me, so I decided to share my own frustrations. Lately, I felt like our conversations have been decreasing, and I'd been wondering what's going on. He said with a surprising reaction, You don't talk about work, Dad. You used to tell me all sorts of things. If you're tired, I can listen to your complaints too. David's response caught me off guard. Previously, he would talk about school, and I would piggyback on that and start talking about work. However, I never initiated conversations about work or vented my frustrations. I've been so curious about David's school life, but I had assumed he wasn't interested in my work. I used to think that parents are listening to their children and occasionally offer advice, while children aren't meant to be conversation partners. Perhaps I also wanted to be a cool dad who didn't show any weaknesses. However, David had grown up, and he had become mature. I could talk to him. He was much more mature than I had imagined. So can I talk to you more from now on? I asked while observing David's reaction. Sure, as long as you're not too pushy, David said, looking a little shy. It remains unclear what exactly constitutes being pushy. But at least he didn't seem to dislike the idea. Without being scared, we will search for the right distance between us through discussions like today. By the way, this beef stew is delicious. Mom would be surprised. Can I have some more? My appetite doubled as my cloudy feelings cleared. I made plenty, so you can eat as much as you want. From now on, I'll occasionally make other dishes too, David said as he served the beef stew. It had been a while since someone cooked for me. I remembered Margaret's words, saying that food tastes better when someone else makes it. Until now, I have been determined to be the one feeding David, but maybe it's okay for him to cook for me sometimes. Margaret was skilled at cooking, so David might have inherited that talent. I can't help but look forward to David's growth and his homemade meals. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning into our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content. Your support means the world to us, and we look forward to sharing more stories and experiences with you. Stay connected, and thanks again for being a valued part of our community.